The blood from his knuckles stained the granite boulder as Xavier shoved it another 3 feet across the unforgiving Montana earth. And somewhere behind him in the valley stood a woman he had never spoken to, but whose father's land bordered the property he was trying to claim before winter turned the ground to iron. It was September 1883, and the homestead laws said a man had to prove up his claim by making improvements, by showing the land could sustain life. And Nathan had decided that meant clearing every cursed stone and stump from the 40 acres he had filed on 6 months prior. The work was brutal, relentless, and lonely, but it was the only language he knew how to speak when it came to declaring his intentions to the world. He had seen Catherine Jensen exactly 4 times since arriving in Butte. The first time was at the general store where she had been buying flour and sugar, her dark blonde hair pinned up beneath a practical bonnet, her hands competent as they counted out coins. The second time was at church, where she sat 3 rows ahead with her father and younger brother, her profile serene against the whitewashed walls. The third time was when he had ridden past their property line and seen her hanging laundry, the wind pressing her calico dress against her frame, and he had forced himself to look straight ahead, even though every instinct told him to stop. The fourth time was just last week at the town dance, where he had stood against the wall for 2 full hours watching her move through a reel with practiced grace. And he had left without saying a single word because his hands were still calloused and cracked from clearing sagebrush. And he smelled like dirt and sweat, even after scrubbing himself raw in the creek. Nathan believed in a specific order to things. A man built his foundation first. A man proved he could provide. A man made himself worthy before he ever opened his mouth to speak of desire or future, or the kind of dreams that kept him awake at night staring at the canvas ceiling of his tent. So he worked. He worked from dawn until the light bled out of the sky, and then he worked by moonlight when the temperature dropped and made the labor almost bearable. He cleared stones that had probably sat undisturbed since the glaciers retreated. He dug out stumps that fought him like living things, their roots reaching deep into the earth, as though they had made a pact with the soil itself. His nearest neighbor, an older man named Samuel Porter, who had come to Montana during the gold rush and stayed when the easy pickings dried up, rode over one afternoon and watched Nathan wrestle with a particularly stubborn ponderosa stump. Samuel sat on his horse for a good 10 minutes before speaking. "You know, there are easier ways to do this," Samuel finally said, his voice carrying the rasp of too many years breathing dust. Nathan straightened, his shirt soaked through despite the cool air. "I would appreciate hearing them." "Dynamite. 2 sticks placed right and you could clear this field in a week instead of a year." Nathan shook his head. "Too expensive. Every dollar I've goes to feed and seed for next spring." Samuel dismounted, moving with the careful stiffness of a man whose joints had started to betray him. He walked around the stump, studying it from different angles. "This is about more than clearing land. I have been watching you, Xavier. You work like a man trying to prove something. Every homesteader has to prove something. That is the law. The law says you need to improve the land. It does not say you need to break your back doing it before asking for help." Samuel paused, then added more quietly, "It also does not say you need to make yourself half dead with exhaustion before you talk to Catherine Jensen." Nathan felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with exertion. "I do not know what you mean. Son, I was young once. I know exactly what you mean. I also know that James Jensen is not the kind of man who will give his daughter to someone without prospects. But here is what I learned after 50 years on this earth. Waiting too long is its own kind of failure. You can clear every rock in Montana, and it will not matter if someone else speaks up first." "Is there someone else?" The question came out sharper than Nathan intended. Samuel shrugged. There are always others. Catherine is a fine woman. Smart, capable, pretty. Her father has a successful ranch. You think you are the only young man in this valley who has noticed. After Samuel left, Nathan worked even harder, driving himself until his muscles screamed and his vision blurred. He told himself it was because winter was coming and he needed to get the land ready. He told himself it was because he wanted to plant winter wheat, wanted to get a head start on building a proper cabin, instead of living in the tent that barely kept out the wind. But Samuel's words had planted something in his mind that grew like bindweed, choking out his carefully maintained patience. The next Sunday, Nathan forced himself to attend church even though he wanted to spend the day finishing the south section of his property. He washed thoroughly in the creek, put on his one good shirt, and rode into Butte as the bells were ringing. The church was a simple structure, built by the community 3 years earlier when the mining town had started to transition into something more permanent. Nathan slipped into a back pew just as the Reverend began speaking. He could see Catherine 3 rows ahead, exactly where she always sat. Her father James was to her right, a solid man in his 50s with silver threading through his dark hair. Her younger brother Thomas sat on her left, fidgeting with the hymnal. Nathan tried to focus on the sermon, something about patience and faith, but his attention kept drifting to the way Catherine held herself, straight-backed and attentive, occasionally whispering something to Thomas that made the boy settle. After the service, people gathered outside to talk, exchanging news and gossip. Nathan normally avoided these gatherings, but today he forced himself to stay, standing awkwardly near the church steps. He watched Catherine speak with several other families, her manner warm but not overly familiar. She had a way of listening that made people lean in, as though what they were saying truly mattered to her. James Jensen stood nearby, discussing cattle prices with several other ranchers. Nathan knew Jensen by reputation. Fair but firm, a man who had built his spread through hard work and smart decisions. He had come to Montana in the late 1860s, when the territory was still raw and dangerous, and had carved out one of the most successful ranches in the valley. "Nathan Xavier, is that right?" The voice came from behind him, and Nathan turned to find Catherine's brother Thomas looking up at him with undisguised curiosity. The boy was perhaps 14, all elbows and enthusiasm. "That is right," Nathan said, caught off guard. "You are the one with the homestead claim east of our property. Pa pointed out your tent when we rode past last month, says you are working that land hard. I am trying to make it productive. Are you really clearing all those rocks by yourself? Jimmy Patterson said he saw you moving boulders that would take 3 men to shift." Nathan felt uncomfortable with the attention. "The rocks needed moving, so I moved them." Thomas grinned. "That is something. Say, do you need any help?" "I am pretty strong for my age, and Pa says idle hands are the devil's workshop." "Thomas, stop pestering Mr. Xavier." Catherine had appeared beside her brother, and Nathan's mouth went dry. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a clear gray-green, the color of sage after rain. There were faint freckles across her nose that spoke of time spent outdoors. "I apologize for my brother. He forgets his manners when he is excited." "No apology needed," Nathan managed. He was being friendly. Friendly and nosy are often the same thing in Thomas's case. She smiled, and Nathan felt something shift in his chest. "But he is right that we have heard about your work. People talk in a small town. They say you are determined to prove up your claim before winter." "That is my intention. It is good land from what I understand. Hard but good. My father says it has potential if someone is willing to put in the effort." Nathan latched onto this. "Your father said that?" "He did. He respects hard work." Catherine glanced over at James, who was still deep in conversation. He came here with nothing and built something lasting. He values that quality in others. There was something in the way she said it that made Nathan wonder if she was trying to tell him something, but before he could figure out how to respond, another voice interrupted. "Catherine, I was hoping to speak with you." A man in his late 20s approached, well dressed in a way that spoke of money. Nathan recognized him as Daniel Hartley, whose father owned one of the larger mining operations near Butte. Daniel had the easy confidence of someone who had never had to break his back for a single meal. "Hello, Daniel," Catherine said, her tone polite but noticeably cooler than it had been moments before. "I was wondering if you might take a ride with me this afternoon. The weather is fine, and I thought we could go up to the ridge. The view is spectacular this time of year." "I appreciate the offer, but I promised Thomas I would help him with his arithmetic. He has been struggling and he has an exam coming up." Daniel's smile tightened slightly. "Surely that could wait. How often do we get days like this?" "Thomas's education cannot wait," Catherine said firmly. "Perhaps another time, of course." Daniel's gaze flickered to Nathan, dismissive. "Another time." After Daniel walked away, Thomas made a face. "I do not really need help with arithmetic. I just do not want to do it." "Then I will help you want to do it," Catherine said, but there was a hint of amusement in her voice. She turned back to Nathan. "It was nice to finally speak with you, Mr. Xavier. I hope your work continues to go well." "Thank you," Nathan said, and then watched as she and Thomas moved toward their father, who was gesturing that it was time to leave. Samuel Porter appeared at Nathan's elbow, chuckling. "Well, that was excruciating to watch. I spoke to her. Barely. But it is a start. Though you might want to work on your conversational skills before Daniel Hartley manages to wear down her resistance." She turned him down. Today she did. But Hartley is persistent, and his family has money and influence. You have 40 acres of rocks and a tent. Samuel clapped Nathan on the shoulder. "Which is why you need to keep clearing that land, boy. Show her you are building something real." Nathan rode back to his claim with renewed determination, but also with a new urgency that had not been there before. The conversation had been brief, but Catherine had known who he was. She had mentioned his work specifically. That meant she had been paying attention, or at least that people had been talking and she had been listening. Over the next 3 weeks, Nathan worked with a fever that bordered on reckless. He cleared the entire south section, piling rocks into borders that would eventually become fence lines. He dug out 17 stumps, using a combination of brute force, leverage, and sheer stubbornness. He cut timber from the foothills and began framing the foundation of a cabin, working into the night by firelight. His hands bled. His back developed knots that never seemed to unwind. He lost weight he could not afford to lose, but the land began to transform. Where there had been chaos, there was now order. Where there had been wild growth, there was now potential. You could see the future in the cleared fields. Imagine wheat growing golden in the summer sun. Picture cattle grazing on the portions too rocky for crops. Nathan stood at the center of his claim one evening as the sun set behind the mountains, turning the sky orange and purple. And for the first time since arriving in Montana, he let himself believe he might actually succeed. "You have done good work here." The voice startled him, and Nathan spun to find James Jensen sitting on his horse at the edge of the property. The older man had clearly been watching for a while, taking in the transformation. "Mr. Jensen," Nathan said, trying not to sound as nervous as he felt. "I did not hear you approach." "You were deep in thought." James dismounted, walking slowly through the cleared section. He bent down, picked up a handful of soil, let it run through his fingers. "This is good earth. Rocky but good. You have worked it well. Thank you, sir. How much more do you have to clear?" The north section still needs work, and I want to get the cabin finished before the snow comes. After that, I can focus on getting ready for spring planting." James nodded slowly. "You are doing this alone." "I am. Pride or poverty?" Nathan hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Both, I suppose. I cannot afford to hire help, and I wanted to prove I could do it myself. There is merit in self-reliance, but there is also wisdom in accepting assistance when it is offered." James turned to face Nathan directly. "I could use an extra hand for a few weeks. Cattle need to be moved to winter pasture, and my regular hands are stretched thin. The pay is fair, and I provide meals. You would still have time to work your claim in the evenings." Nathan's first instinct was to refuse. He did not want charity, and working for Catherine's father felt complicated in ways he did not want to examine too closely. But the practical side of his mind recognized the offer for what it was: a chance to earn money he desperately needed, and perhaps an opportunity to prove himself to the man whose good opinion might matter more than anyone else's. "I would be grateful for the work," Nathan said finally. "Good. Come by tomorrow at dawn. We start early." James paused, studying Nathan with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "My daughter mentioned she met you at church." Nathan's throat went dry. "We spoke briefly. Catherine is a good judge of character. She said you seemed like a serious young man." James let that hang in the air for a moment. "I value seriousness. This territory does not have much patience for anything else, but I also value honesty, so I am going to be direct with you. If you are interested in courting my daughter, you need to be in a position to support a wife. That means a proven claim, a proper home, and the ability to weather a bad season without going under. Can you understand that?" "Yes, sir. I do not say this to discourage you. I say it because I respect the work you have been doing, and I think you deserve to know where things stand. Catherine has had other suitors, some with more money, some with more established positions. She has turned them all down because she is waiting for the right man, not just the most convenient one. But waiting has its limits, and she is 22 years old. Time is a factor." Nathan felt his heart hammering. "I understand. Do you? Because from where I stand, you have been clearing land for 6 months without saying a single word to her. That shows discipline, but it also shows fear. A man needs both courage and discipline to make a life in this territory. I wanted to have something to offer first. That is admirable. But at some point you need to actually make the offer." James walked back to his horse, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. "Dawn tomorrow. Do not be late." Nathan watched him ride away, his mind spinning. The conversation had been both encouraging and terrifying. James had essentially given him permission to court Catherine, but had also made clear that permission was not enough. He needed to finish what he started. He needed to prove the claim, build the cabin, establish himself as someone who could weather the storms that Montana would inevitably throw at him. That night, lying in his tent with the wind howling outside, Nathan made a series of decisions. He would work for James and save every penny. He would finish the cabin by the end of October, even if it meant working through the night. He would plant winter wheat in November if the ground held. And when he had done all of that, when he had transformed his claim into something real and lasting, he would ride over to the Jensen ranch and ask Catherine properly if she would allow him to court her. It was a good plan. It was a solid plan. It was the kind of methodical approach that had gotten Nathan through every challenge he had faced since leaving Ohio 2 years earlier. What Nathan did not account for was Catherine having plans of her own. Working for James Jensen meant being around the ranch headquarters most days, which meant seeing Catherine regularly. She was not the kind of rancher's daughter who stayed inside doing needlework while the men handled the livestock. She was often outside working alongside everyone else, whether it was helping with the horses, managing the kitchen garden, or keeping the account books in order. Nathan learned quickly that Catherine ran half the operation, even if her father was the public face of the enterprise. The first few days were awkward. Nathan tried to focus on his work, on learning the rhythms of the Jensen operation, on proving himself to the other ranch hands. But he was always aware of where Catherine was, what she was doing, and it made him clumsy in ways that frustrated him. He dropped a rope he had been coiling. He missed a gate latch and had to chase down 3 steers who decided to explore their newfound freedom. He hammered his own thumb while fixing a fence post. Catherine noticed. Of course she noticed. She was too observant not to. On the 4th day, she brought lunch out to where Nathan and 2 other hands were working on repairing the corral. She carried a basket with sandwiches and a jar of cold tea, distributing the food with easy efficiency. When she handed Nathan his portion, their fingers brushed briefly and he nearly dropped the plate. "Careful," she said, and there was definitely amusement in her voice. "That is the last of the roast beef. If you drop it, you get hardtack." "I will be careful," Nathan said, taking the plate with both hands this time. The other hands, Jake and Peter, took their food and wandered off to eat in the shade, leaving Nathan and Catherine standing by the corral fence. She did not follow them, instead leaning against the fence rail and looking out at the cattle grazing in the distance. "My father says you are a good worker," she said after a moment. "He says you do not complain and you do not cut corners. I appreciate his good opinion. He also says you are clearing your claim by yourself, which he thinks is either very determined or very foolish. Probably both." Catherine smiled at that, a real smile that made her whole face light up. "Honest, that is rare. I do not see the point in being otherwise. You would be surprised how many people find honesty inconvenient when it does not serve their purposes." She turned to look at him directly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you come to Montana? You sound educated." "You could have stayed wherever you came from and had an easier life." Nathan considered how much to tell her. He had not talked about his past with anyone in Butte, preferring to let his work speak for itself. But there was something in Catherine's expression, an openness that invited confidence. "I came from Ohio," he said finally. "My father was a doctor. He wanted me to follow in his profession, sent me to college to study medicine. But I realized after 2 years that I was doing it for him, not for myself. I wanted something different. Something where the results of my work were tangible, where I could build something with my own hands. So you abandoned medicine and came west to break rocks." There was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. "It sounds foolish when you say it like that." "No," Catherine said softly. "It sounds brave. It takes courage to disappoint the people you love in order to be true to yourself." They stood in silence for a moment, and Nathan felt something shift between them, a recognition that went beyond words. He wanted to say more, to tell her about the nights he lay awake wondering if he had made a terrible mistake, about the letters from his father that grew shorter and colder with each exchange, about the bone-deep satisfaction he felt when he cleared a field or set a fence post perfectly straight. But before he could find the words, Jake called out that they needed to get back to work. Catherine pushed away from the fence. "I should let you eat. But Nathan," she waited until he looked at her. "I am glad you came to Montana. I think you belong here." Over the following weeks, Nathan and Catherine fell into a pattern of brief conversations and shared moments. She would bring lunch, or he would see her working with the horses, and they would exchange a few words. The conversations were never long, always chapered by proximity to others, but they were enough to build something. Nathan learned that Catherine had taught herself to read from the Bible and a handful of books, her mother had brought west before dying of fever when Catherine was 12. He learned that she had essentially raised Thomas herself, taking over the maternal role while also learning everything her father could teach her about running a ranch. He learned that she was stubborn and practical, and had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. Catherine learned that Nathan had read Shakespeare and could quote passages from memory, that he had a methodical mind that approached problems like puzzles to be solved, and that he was fundamentally kind in ways that showed in small gestures. The way he gentled a nervous horse, the way he made sure the younger ranch hands got the less difficult tasks, the way he thanked her every time she brought food or water. Daniel Hartley came by the ranch twice during the time Nathan was working there. Both times, he made it clear he was interested in spending time with Catherine. Both times, she found polite but firm ways to decline. Nathan noticed that Daniel looked at him with increasing hostility, as though he had figured out the source of the competition. "You should be careful of Hartley," Jake said one evening as they were finishing up for the day. "His family has influence in Butte. They can make things difficult if they want to. I have not done anything to him. You do not have to. He wants Catherine and he is not used to being told no. The fact that you are around makes him nervous. Catherine can make her own choices. True enough. But men like Hartley do not always respect that." Jake paused, then added, "Just watch your back." Nathan took the warning seriously, but he did not let it change his behavior. He worked hard, saved his money, and used every evening to continue improving his claim. By mid-October, the cabin was taking shape. The walls were up, the roof was on, and he had built a stone fireplace that would keep the place warm through the winter. It was not fancy, but it was solid, and it was his. Samuel Porter rode by one afternoon and whistled appreciatively. "You did good work here, Nathan. This is a real home. It is a start. More than a start. This is the kind of place a man could raise a family." Samuel dismounted and walked through the cabin, testing the floor joists, examining the fireplace construction. "When are you going to ask her?" "Ask who what? Do not be dense. When are you going to ask Catherine to let you court her?" Nathan felt his face heat. "I need to finish proving up the claim first, get through winter and show I can make the land productive. Winter is not the time to plant crops, Nathan. Winter is the time to build relationships, to show a woman you are serious about her, not just about the land. Her father said I needed to be in a position to support a wife. And you are. You have a cabin. You have cleared land. You have saved money from working for James. You are as ready as you are going to be." Samuel fixed him with a hard look. "But you know what will happen if you wait too long. Daniel Hartley or someone like him will get impatient. They will make their move, and Catherine will have to make a decision based on the options in front of her. You cannot expect her to wait forever for you to feel ready." Nathan knew Samuel was right, but the fear was still there. The fear of rejection, of not being enough, of losing something precious before he ever really had it. But there was also the fear of losing Catherine to his own hesitation, and that fear was starting to outweigh all the others. The decision was made for him 2 days later. Nathan was working on his claim, cutting firewood to build up a supply for winter, when he heard a horse approaching. He looked up to see Catherine riding toward him, alone, sitting easy in the saddle in a way that spoke of years of practice. He set down the axe and walked to meet her, suddenly aware of how sweaty and dirty he was. Catherine dismounted before he reached her, looping the reins over a branch. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said. "You are not. I was just cutting wood." "I can see that." She looked around the property, taking in all the changes since she had last been here, which must have been months ago when her father rode the property boundaries. "Nathan, this is incredible. You really did clear all of this yourself. It needed to be done. Most men would have given up, or would have cut corners, done the minimum to prove up the claim. She walked toward the cabin, and Nathan followed. Inside, she examined everything with the same careful attention her father had shown on his land. She tested the door latch, looked up at the roof beams, ran her hand along the fireplace stones. "This is good work, solid. Thank you." Catherine turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that made Nathan's breath catch. "Why have you not asked to court me?" The directness of the question stunned him. "I wanted to have something to offer first. You have been saying that for months. At what point is it enough? When you have cleared every stone in Montana, when you have built a barn and planted 5 crops and raised a herd of cattle." She stepped closer. "My father told me about your conversation. He said he gave you his blessing, told you what he expected. You have met those expectations, Nathan. You have proven yourself 10 times over, so what is really stopping you?" Nathan struggled to find words. "Fear. Of what? Of not being enough. Of you realizing you could do better. Of failing and disappointing you." Catherine reached out and took his hands, seemingly unbothered by the calluses and cuts. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a man who left behind everything familiar to chase something real. I see someone who works until his hands bleed because he believes in building a foundation before anything else. I see a person who is kind and honest and determined. And I see someone who has been so busy proving himself to everyone else that he forgot to actually claim what he wants." "What I want is you," Nathan said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I have wanted you since the first time I saw you in the general store. I have thought about you every day since then. I clear rocks and I think about what you would say about the progress. I build this cabin and I imagine you living in it. I plant crops that have not even grown yet and I picture you helping me harvest them. You are in every plan I make, every dream I have for the future." Catherine smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then ask me." "Catherine Jensen, will you allow me to court you?" "Yes," she said simply. "I thought you would never ask." Nathan felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it was there. "I do not have much to offer yet. Just this claim and this cabin and a lot of hard work ahead. That is more than enough. That is everything." She squeezed his hands. "But Nathan, you need to understand something. I am not delicate. I am not going to sit inside doing needlework while you work yourself to death trying to build an empire to impress me. If we are doing this, we are building together. That is the only way I know how to be. I would not want it any other way." "Good." She released his hands and stepped back. "Now, I should get back before my father sends Thomas to find me, but I want you to come to Sunday dinner this week. Proper courting starts with proper family time." Nathan watched her ride away, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, he felt like his life was coming together. The land was cleared, the cabin was built, and the woman he loved had said yes. Sunday dinner at the Jensen Ranch was both wonderful and terrifying. Catherine had clearly told her father about their conversation, because James greeted Nathan with a firm handshake and an approving nod. Thomas was thrilled, peppering Nathan with questions about his claim and asking when he could come help with the work. The meal itself was delicious, a roasted chicken with vegetables from Catherine's garden, and Nathan tried to mind his manners while also participating in the conversation. Over the following weeks, Nathan and Catherine's courtship developed a rhythm. He would come to the ranch for Sunday dinners, and Catherine would occasionally ride over to his claim to see his progress. They were never alone for long, always mindful of propriety, but the stolen moments were precious. Catherine helped him hang curtains in the cabin windows, fabric she had sewn herself during the evenings. Nathan built her a bookshelf for the collection she was slowly accumulating, each volume a treasure saved for over months. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their hopes, their fears, the kind of life they wanted to build. Winter came early that year, snow falling in late October and not letting up. Nathan had prepared as well as he could, stockpiling firewood and supplies, but the isolation was harder than he had anticipated. The cold was bone deep, the kind that made every task twice as difficult. He could not work the land, so he focused on the things he could control: maintaining the cabin, caring for the 2 horses he had purchased with his wages from James, planning for spring. Catherine visited when the weather allowed, always accompanied by Thomas or her father. She brought food, supplies, and her presence, which was worth more than anything else. They would sit by the fire and talk, or she would read aloud while Nathan worked on repairing tack or sharpening tools. It was domestic and comfortable, and everything Nathan had not realized he was missing. In December, Daniel Hartley made one last attempt to change Catherine's mind. He showed up at the Jensen ranch on a clear Sunday, dressed in expensive clothes and driving a fancy buggy. He asked to speak with Catherine privately, and she agreed, stepping out onto the porch with him while Nathan waited inside with James and Thomas, trying not to let his anxiety show. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Nathan could not hear what was said, but he saw Catherine shake her head firmly, saw Daniel's face redden with anger or embarrassment or both. When Catherine came back inside, she looked tired but resolute. "That is finished," she said simply, and would not elaborate further. James caught Nathan's eye and gave a slight nod, as though to say he had made the right choice in waiting, in building something real before making his claim. But there was also a warning in that look. Now that Catherine had made her choice public, Nathan needed to follow through. He needed to prove that her faith in him was justified. January and February were brutal. The snow piled high, temperatures dropped so low that water froze in minutes, and the wind howled like something alive. Nathan lost weight despite eating everything he could, his body burning through calories just to stay warm. He checked on his horses constantly, keeping them sheltered and fed. He reinforced the cabin where the wind found gaps. He read the books Catherine had loaned him by firelight and thought about spring. On a particularly cold night in late February, someone pounded on Nathan's door. He opened it to find Samuel Porter standing there, half frozen, barely able to speak. "Need help," Samuel managed. "My cabin, fire." Nathan did not hesitate. He grabbed blankets, pulled on every warm layer he owned, and followed Samuel back through the snow. Samuel's cabin was indeed on fire, or had been. The fire had burned itself out, but the structure was a total loss, and Samuel had nowhere to go. "You are staying with me," Nathan said, not making it a question. Samuel stayed for 3 weeks. Nathan gave him the bed and slept by the fire. They shared food and firewood and stories, and Nathan learned more about Samuel's past. The wife who had died in childbirth, the son who had never taken a breath, the decades of loneliness that Samuel had filled with work and wandering. It was a sobering reminder of how fragile life was in Montana, how quickly everything could be lost. When the weather broke enough for travel, James Jensen rode over with Thomas. They surveyed the remains of Samuel's cabin, and James made an immediate decision. "You are too old to rebuild on your own," James told Samuel. "I have been needing someone to help manage the winter operations, someone with experience. The pay is fair, and room and board are included. You would have your own cabin on my property, and you would be doing me a favor by accepting." Samuel looked at James for a long moment, then nodded. "I accept." As they prepared to leave, James pulled Nathan aside. "You did a good thing taking him in. That is the kind of character that matters out here, looking after your neighbor. Anyone would have done it. But you were the one who did." James paused. Catherine mentioned you are planning to plant winter wheat as soon as the ground thaws. I have seed I can loan you if you need it. You can pay me back after harvest. That is generous. It is practical. I want you to succeed, Nathan. Not just because my daughter cares about you, but because this valley needs people like you. People who understand that building something real takes time and sacrifice. James gripped Nathan's shoulder. But I need to know you are serious about Catherine. That you are not going to court her for a year and then decide you want to see what else is out there. I am serious, Nathan said without hesitation. I want to marry her. Then you should ask her, properly. And soon. She is ready, even if you are still questioning yourself. March brought the thaw and with it, an explosion of activity. Nathan worked from before dawn until well after dark, preparing his fields for planting. Catherine came over nearly every day, helping with tasks that did not require brute strength. Organizing the cabin, starting a garden, making lists of everything they would need. It was an unspoken understanding that they were preparing for a shared future, even though Nathan had not yet formally proposed. On a Wednesday afternoon in late March, Nathan rode into Butte and went to the jeweler. He had been saving money for months, and he used it to purchase a simple gold ring. It was not fancy, but it was real, and it was the best he could afford. That Sunday, after dinner at the Jensen ranch, Nathan asked Catherine to walk with him. Thomas started to follow, but Catherine gave him a look that made him stay behind, though he was clearly disappointed to miss whatever was about to happen. They walked down to the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the Jensen property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Nathan had rehearsed what he wanted to say a dozen times, but now that the moment was here, all his careful words evaporated. I am not good at speeches, he started. I know I should have something prepared, something eloquent, but all I can think about is how much better my life has been since you came into it. Before you, everything was work and survival and pushing through each day. Now, everything has purpose. I clear a field and I think about our future. I build a fence and I imagine our children playing inside it. I watch the sunset and I want to share it with you. Catherine was watching him with those gray-green eyes, and Nathan felt his courage almost fail. But he had cleared 40 acres of Montana wilderness by himself. He could do this. I love you, Catherine. I want to spend my life with you, building something together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to share the good times and weather the hard times as a team. He pulled out the ring, holding it up so it caught the dying light. Will you marry me? Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Yes, yes, of course, yes. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms, and he was kissing her for the first time, and nothing else mattered. Not the cold, not the uncertainty of the future, not the 1,000 challenges that still lay ahead. In that moment, everything was perfect. They set the wedding for June, wanting to wait until the weather was reliably warm and Nathan's crops were in the ground. The engagement was announced, and the community responded with enthusiasm. Wedding gifts started arriving at both the Jensen ranch and Nathan's claim. Practical things like dishes and blankets and tools, the kind of items that would help a young couple start their life together. Nathan threw himself into preparing for married life with the same determination he had brought to clearing his land. He built a larger bed frame, constructed a proper kitchen table with chairs, and added shelves and storage throughout the cabin. Catherine worked on sewing their linens, creating curtains and quilts, and the dozens of textile items a household needed. They made decisions together about everything from what crops to plant to where to put the garden to what color to paint the cabin trim. Daniel Hartley left Butte in April, apparently accepting a position with his father's mining operations in Nevada. Nathan heard the news with relief. He had not wanted conflict, and Hartley's departure removed a source of potential trouble. In May, Nathan's winter wheat came up strong and green, a sea of growing grain that represented his first real crop. Catherine came to see it, walking through the rows with wonder on her face. "You did this," she said. "You made this happen." "We did this," Nathan corrected. "Your father loaned me the seed. You helped me decide where to plant. This is ours." The wedding took place on a Saturday in early June at the church in Butte. It seemed like the entire valley turned out for the ceremony. Catherine wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple but beautiful, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Nathan wore his best suit, which Samuel had helped him purchase in Butte. Thomas stood up as best man, grinning throughout the entire ceremony. James gave Catherine away with visible emotion, though he kept his composure. Samuel, now comfortably settled as James's right-hand man, sat in the front row and did not bother to hide his tears. The Reverend kept the ceremony short, speaking about partnership and commitment and the challenges of building a life in Montana. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Catherine with joy and relief and love, and the congregation burst into applause. The reception was held at the Jensen Ranch, with tables set up outside and enough food to feed twice the number of people who attended. There was music and dancing and toasts. James gave a speech about watching his daughter grow into a remarkable woman, about his confidence that Nathan would be a good husband, about the importance of family and community. Samuel gave a speech about second chances and the courage it took to build something new. Thomas gave a speech that was mostly embarrassing stories about Catherine, which made everyone laugh and made Catherine blush. As the sun set and the party continued, Nathan and Catherine slipped away, riding together to the cabin that was now their home. Inside, everything was ready. The bed was made with the quilt Catherine had sewn. The fire was laid and ready to light. Their few possessions were arranged neatly, a combination of what they had brought individually and what they had been given. Nathan lit the fire while Catherine changed into her nightgown. When she emerged from behind the privacy screen, he caught his breath. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was his wife, his partner, the person he would build a life with. That night they came together as husband and wife, learning each other's bodies with tenderness and passion. They were both inexperienced, but they were patient with each other, and what they lacked in expertise, they made up for in love and genuine care. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their bed, Catherine's head on Nathan's chest, his arm wrapped around her, and talked about their plans for the future until sleep finally claimed them. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Learning to share space, to coordinate routines, to navigate the 100 small compromises that living together required. But it was also joyful. Nathan loved waking up next to Catherine, loved coming in from the fields to find her working in the garden or preparing a meal, loved the sound of her singing while she worked. Catherine loved having a partner, someone who respected her opinions and valued her contributions, who did not try to keep her sheltered, but instead welcomed her as an equal participant in building their life. The wheat harvest in August was successful. Not spectacular, but solid, yielding enough to sell some for cash while keeping plenty for seed and feed. Nathan also sold 2 of the calves he had purchased earlier in the year, adding to their savings. They were not wealthy, but they were stable, and that felt like victory. In September, Catherine told Nathan she was pregnant. The news filled him with joy and terror in equal measure. A child. They were going to have a child. He became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Catherine from doing any heavy work, which she found both endearing and irritating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from lifting a basket of vegetables from the garden. "Women have been having babies while working farms for thousands of years. I will be fine." Nathan forced himself to step back, to trust that Catherine knew her own limits. But he also quietly took over more of the heavier chores, and Catherine quietly let him, understanding that this was how he processed his fear. Winter came again, but this time Nathan was not alone in his cabin. He and Catherine weathered the cold together, passing the long evenings in conversation, or reading aloud, or simply sitting quietly in each other's presence. Catherine's pregnancy progressed normally, though the morning sickness was rough and the fatigue was significant. Nathan learned to cook basic meals so Catherine could rest when she needed to. Thomas came by regularly, checking on his sister and helping Nathan with chores. The boy was growing up fast, becoming a capable young man who took pride in being an uncle-to-be. James stopped by less frequently, but when he did, he always brought supplies and stayed to share a meal, clearly pleased with how Nathan and Catherine were building their life together. In March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Catherine went into labor. Nathan rode for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Peterson who lived in Butt, then rode to the Jensen ranch to alert James and Thomas. By the time he got back to the cabin, Catherine was deep into labor, breathing through contractions with gritted teeth. The labor lasted 14 hours. Nathan stayed by Catherine's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when he felt completely helpless. Mrs. Peterson was calm and competent, coaching Catherine through each stage. James and Thomas waited outside, maintaining the fire and heating water and generally staying out of the way. Finally, in the early morning hours, a baby's cry filled the cabin. Nathan felt tears streaming down his face as Mrs. Peterson placed a small, wriggling infant in Catherine's arms. "A boy," Mrs. Peterson announced, "healthy and strong." Catherine looked exhausted but radiant as she gazed down at their son. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." They named him James Samuel Xavier, after both their fathers, the man who had raised Catherine and the man who had become Nathan's mentor and friend. Baby James, who they immediately started calling Jamie, had Catherine's eyes and Nathan's dark hair and a pair of lungs that could wake the dead. Fatherhood transformed Nathan in ways he had not anticipated. He had thought he understood love when he married Catherine, but the fierce protective tenderness he felt for his son was different, overwhelming. He would stand over Jamie's cradle for long minutes, just watching him sleep, marveling at the tiny perfection of his hands and feet. Catherine adjusted to motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else. She nursed Jamie, cared for him through the sleepless nights, and still managed to keep the household running. Nathan helped where he could, learning to change diapers and rock Jamie to sleep, though he felt clumsy and uncertain compared to Catherine's natural ease. That spring, Nathan planted twice as much wheat, adding corn and vegetables as well. With Catherine's help and occasional assistance from Thomas, he managed to get everything in the ground. The work was hard, but it was also satisfying in a way that went beyond mere survival. They were building something lasting, creating a legacy for their son. Summer brought a health scare when Jamie developed a fever that would not break. For 3 terrifying days, Nathan and Catherine took turns holding their son, trying to keep him cool, praying harder than they had ever prayed in their lives. Mrs. Peterson came and did what she could, but ultimately all they could do was wait and hope. On the fourth day, the fever broke and Jamie opened his eyes and started to cry for food, and Nathan nearly collapsed with relief. "I have never been so scared," he told Catherine that night after Jamie was asleep. "Neither have I," she admitted. "But he is strong. He is a fighter. Like his mother." The second harvest was even better than the first. Nathan's fields yielded enough wheat to pay off the seed loan to James with interest and still have plenty left to sell. They purchased 2 more cows and a bull, starting to build the herd that would eventually become a stable source of income. The cabin, which had seemed so spacious when Nathan built it, was starting to feel cramped with a growing baby, and Nathan began planning an addition. In the fall, Samuel Porter announced that he was courting a widow from Butt, a woman named Margaret who ran a boarding house. The news delighted everyone. Samuel, who had seemed destined to spend his final years alone, had found companionship and perhaps love. He married Margaret in a quiet ceremony in November, and she moved into the cabin on the Jensen property with him. Life settled into a rhythm. Nathan and Catherine worked their claim, slowly expanding and improving year by year. Jamie grew from infant to toddler, taking his first steps and saying his first words, becoming a joyful, curious child who loved being outside with his parents. Nathan built the addition to the cabin, creating a separate bedroom so that Jamie could have his own space. In 1886, Catherine became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In early 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth. Grace was smaller than Jamie had been, but equally healthy, with blonde hair like Catherine's and a temperament that was remarkably calm. Where Jamie had been a fussy baby, Grace was content to lie in her cradle and observe the world with serious eyes. The years passed in a blur of work and growth. Nathan's claim, which had started as 40 acres of rocks and stumps, became a productive farm. He added more land when a neighboring claim failed, purchasing it at a good price and expanding his holdings. He built a barn, a proper chicken coop, and a smokehouse. Catherine's garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes. Their herd grew to 20 head of cattle, enough to sell off several each year for profit. Jamie grew into a boy who loved the land as much as his father did, following Nathan through the fields and asking endless questions. Grace proved to have her mother's practical intelligence, learning to read at a young age and developing a passion for organizing everything from the pantry to her father's tool collection. In 1889, Catherine had a third child, another boy they named Thomas William, honoring both her brother and Nathan's middle name. Thomas was a handful from birth, energetic and fearless, constantly getting into trouble that required rescue. The community around Butt continued to develop. More families arrived, drawn by the combination of mining opportunities and good land. A school was built, and Jamie and eventually Grace attended, though the walk was long and they sometimes had to stay in town during bad weather. The church expanded, adding a bell tower and new pews. Roads improved, making travel easier. Montana became a state in 1889, a transition that brought both celebration and new challenges as territorial laws gave way to state governance. Through it all, Nathan and Catherine's partnership deepened. They had disagreements, of course. Catherine thought Nathan was too cautious about expanding their operation, while Nathan thought Catherine sometimes took on too much. But they had learned to communicate, to listen to each other, to find compromises that honored both their perspectives. They made decisions together about everything from which crops to plant to how to discipline the children to when to sell cattle. James Jensen remained a steady presence in their lives, growing older but still sharp and capable. He loved his grandchildren fiercely, taking them riding and teaching them about ranching and telling them stories about the early days in Montana. Thomas, Catherine's brother, grew into a man and eventually married a schoolteacher from Butte. Samuel and Margaret became beloved pseudo-grandparents to Nathan and Catherine's children, always ready with treats and patience. In 1892, Nathan decided to run for the local school board. Catherine had encouraged him, pointing out that he cared deeply about education and had ideas about how to improve the system. He won the election and served for 6 years, helping to establish standards and secure funding for better facilities. It was his way of giving back to the community that had given him and Catherine so much. As the century drew to a close, Nathan and Catherine's farm was one of the most successful in the valley. They employed several hands during planting and harvest, providing good wages and fair treatment. Their children were healthy and thriving. Jamie, now a young man of 16, was already talking about claiming land of his own. Grace, at 12, was the smartest student in her class and had started talking about becoming a teacher. Thomas, at 10, was still a wild one, but he had a good heart and was learning discipline through work on the farm. One evening in late summer of 1899, Nathan and Catherine sat on the porch of their cabin, which had grown over the years to include that original addition plus a proper front porch and a second story. The children were inside doing their evening chores. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. "You ever think about that first year?" Catherine asked, leaning against Nathan's shoulder. "When you were living in a tent and clearing rocks?" "Sometimes," Nathan said. "It seems like a lifetime ago. You were so serious, so determined. I remember hearing about the man who was working his claim alone, refusing all help, and I thought you must be either incredibly stubborn or incredibly brave." "I was terrified," Nathan admitted. "I had no idea if I could actually make it work. I just knew I had to try." "You did more than try. You built something amazing." Catherine gestured at the farm spread out before them, the fields golden with nearly ripe wheat, the cattle grazing peacefully, the barn and outbuildings solid and well maintained. "This is more than just a successful farm. This is a legacy." "We built it together," Nathan said. "I cleared the rocks, but you planted the seeds. I built the structures, but you made them homes. None of this would exist without you." Catherine lifted her head to kiss him, a soft press of lips that still held the spark they had discovered on their wedding night 16 years earlier. "I love you, Nathan Xavier. I love you, Catherine Xavier." Nathan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for being patient with me while I figured out that land and work were not enough, that building a life meant building it with someone, not just for someone." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside, they could hear their children laughing about something, the sound of a family at ease with each other. Nathan thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. Leaving Ohio, coming west, clearing 40 acres of stubborn Montana earth, learning to trust that he could be worthy of love, finding the courage to claim not just land but also a partner. He had cleared every stone and stump before he ever spoke her name, believing the land had to come first. But Catherine had taught him that land and love were not separate things, that building a home and building a relationship were part of the same essential work. The land had given them foundation and stability, but love had given them purpose and joy. Over the next decade, Nathan and Catherine watched their children grow into adults. Jamie claimed land adjacent to their property and began his own farm, eventually marrying a girl from Butte and starting his own family. Grace did become a teacher, taking a position at the school in Butte, and proving to be gifted at inspiring her students. Thomas, after a few wild years that gave his parents considerable worry, settled down and joined Jamie on his farm, the two brothers working together in much the way Nathan and Catherine had always worked as partners. James Jensen passed away in 1903, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76. His funeral was one of the largest Butt had ever seen, attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. Nathan spoke at the service, talking about the man who had given him a chance, who had taught him about integrity and hard work, who had trusted him with his daughter and never regretted it. Catherine grieved her father deeply, but she took comfort in knowing he had lived to see her happy and his grandchildren thriving. She and Nathan maintained the tradition of Sunday dinners, now held at their farmhouse, bringing together their growing extended family. Samuel Porter lived to the remarkable age of 87, finally passing in 1909. His wife Margaret followed him 6 months later, as though she could not bear to be without him. Their funeral brought together everyone who had known them, celebrating two people who had found love late in life and made the most of every day they had together. As Nathan entered his 50s, he began to slow down, letting Jamie and Thomas handle more of the heavy farm work. He focused on planning and management, using the experience of 30 years to make strategic decisions about crops and cattle and land use. Catherine remained as sharp and capable as ever, running the household and keeping the family finances in order with the same competence she had always shown. They became grandparents multiple times over as their children married and had families of their own. The original cabin, which had once seemed so modest, became the center of a small compound of buildings housing multiple generations. Family gatherings were loud and chaotic and wonderful, filled with children playing and adults talking, and the kind of joy that comes from deep roots and strong connections. In 1915, Nathan and Catherine celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together everyone they loved. Jamie and his wife Anna had 3 children. Grace had married a fellow teacher named Robert, and they had 2 children. Thomas had married a neighboring rancher's daughter named Elizabeth, and they had 4 children with another on the way. The farmhouse was bursting with family, and Nathan looked around at what he and Catherine had created and felt overwhelming gratitude. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone in their bedroom, Catherine took Nathan's hand. They were both showing signs of age now. Nathan's hair was more gray than brown, and his back sometimes ached from old injuries that never quite healed. Catherine's face showed lines from 30 years of Montana sun, and her hands were gnarled from decades of work. But when Nathan looked at her, he still saw the young woman who had ridden to his claim alone to ask why he had not spoken to her. 30 years, Catherine said softly. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like forever, Nathan said. But I would not change a single moment. Not even the hard times, especially not the hard times. They made us who we are. They taught us we could weather anything together. Catherine smiled. Do you remember what you told me the day you proposed, that you imagined our children playing inside the fences you were building? I do. Look what we built, Nathan. Not just the farm, not just the success. We built a family. We built a community. We built a legacy that will outlast us. She squeezed his hand. You were right to clear those fields first, even if I was impatient with you. You needed to prove to yourself that you could do it, that you were worthy. But I hope you know now that you were always worthy, from that very first day. Nathan pulled her close, kissing her forehead. I know, but it took me a long time to believe it. You gave me that. You gave me the confidence to be more than just a man who could clear rocks. You made me a husband, a father, a partner. You made me whole. They held each other as the night deepened. Two people who had started with nothing but determination and love, and had built a life that exceeded everything they had imagined. The farm would continue after them, passed down to children and grandchildren who would add their own stories to the foundation Nathan and Catherine had created. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, still in love after 30 years, still grateful for the day their paths had crossed. The years continued to pass. Nathan and Catherine moved into their 70s, becoming the beloved patriarch and matriarch of an ever-expanding family. They eventually stepped back from active farm management entirely, turning over operations to Jamie and Thomas while they focused on enjoying their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Nathan's health began to decline in his late 70s. A lifetime of hard physical labor had taken its toll on his body, and a heart condition that had been mild for years gradually worsened. But his mind remained sharp, and he spent his final years recording stories of the early days in Montana, wanting to preserve those memories for future generations. Catherine remained healthy and active well into her 80s, still tending a small garden and managing the household accounts with the same precision she always had. But when Nathan passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1927 at the age of 76, something essential went out of her. She continued for another year, maintaining her routines and spending time with her family, but everyone could see that she was waiting. Catherine died in the summer of 1928, exactly 1 year after Nathan. She was found in her garden, surrounded by the flowers she loved, wearing the gold ring Nathan had given her 43 years earlier. The doctor said her heart simply stopped, but her family knew the truth. She had missed Nathan too much to stay without him. They were buried side by side in the cemetery overlooking Butte, with a simple shared headstone that read, Nathan Xavier and Catherine Xavier. Together, they built a legacy of love. The funeral was enormous, attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched over 5 decades in Montana. After the service, the family gathered at the farm that Nathan and Catherine had built together. Jamie, now 66 years old and looking so much like his father, stood on the porch and looked out at the fields that his father had cleared stone by stone. Dad used to tell me that he spent 6 months clearing this land before he ever spoke to Mom, Jamie said to his own children and grandchildren gathered around him. He said he needed to prove himself first, needed to build something real. But I think what he really needed was to become the kind of man who deserved her. And in doing that work, he became the man we all knew and loved. Grace, standing beside her brother, added, Mom used to say that Dad showed love through action. That every rock he cleared, every fence he built, every crop he planted was a way of saying I love you, I choose you, I am building this for us. She said it was the most romantic thing she had ever experienced, even if she had to wait months to hear him actually say it. The family spent the rest of the day sharing stories, remembering the two people who had started with nothing but determination and love, and had built something that would last for generations. The farm continued to thrive under Jamie and Thomas's management, eventually being passed down to the next generation, and the next, each one adding their own improvements while honoring the foundation Nathan and Catherine had laid. The original cabin, that first structure Nathan had built with his own hands, was preserved as a historical building, maintained by the family as a reminder of where it all started. Inside, visitors could see the simple furniture Nathan had made, the quilt Catherine had sewn for their wedding, the tools Nathan had used to clear the land, and photographs documenting the growth of the farm over the decades. On the wall hung a framed piece of paper with Nathan's handwriting, something he had written near the end of his life. It said, I came to Montana believing that land was everything, that a man's worth was measured by what he could build with his own hands. But Catherine taught me that love was the foundation beneath it all. The land gave us stability, but love gave us joy. The work gave us purpose, but love gave us meaning. I cleared every stone before I spoke her name, but she cleared every doubt from my heart. That was the real miracle. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century. The farm that Nathan and Catherine built evolved with the times, incorporating modern technology while maintaining the core values of hard work, family, and integrity that the founders had established. Their descendants numbered in the hundreds, spread across Montana and beyond, but all carrying with them the story of the cowboy who cleared the land, stone by stone, and the woman who had the patience and courage to wait for him to realize that love and land were meant to be built together. In 2027, exactly 100 years after Nathan's death, the family held a reunion at the farm. Descendants came from all over the country, some who still worked the land and others who had pursued different paths, but remained connected to their roots. They toured the preserved cabin, walked through the fields that Nathan had cleared, and shared stories that had been passed down through 5 generations. The oldest attendee was Nathan and Catherine's great-great-granddaughter, a woman in her 90s who had been told stories by Grace herself before she died. She stood on the porch of the old cabin and told the gathered crowd about her great-great-grandmother's determination and her great-great-grandfather's dedication. "They teach us that love is not just emotion," she said, her voice carrying despite her age. "Love is action. Love is clearing the rocks that stand in the way. Love is building something that will last beyond your own lifetime. Love is choosing someone and then proving that choice every single day through your work and your commitment and your partnership." Nathan and Catherine understood that. They lived it. And because they did, all of us are here today. The Montana sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors that Nathan and Catherine had watched together so many times. The wheat in the fields moved in the wind like waves on a golden ocean, growing from soil that had once been covered in rocks and stumps, nourished by the sweat and dreams of 2 people who had built something real. And in that moment, standing on land that had been transformed by love and labor, their descendants understood the true meaning of legacy. It was not just the acres or the buildings or the financial success. It was the understanding that anything worth having required patience and dedication. That love was something you built as surely as you built a cabin or cleared a field, and that the work you put in at the beginning determined everything that came after. Nathan had cleared every stone and stump before he ever spoke Catherine's name, believing the land had to come first. But in the end, it was love that had come first, last, and always. The land had been the foundation, but love had been the structure, the walls, the roof, and every room inside. Love had been everything. The story of Nathan and Catherine Xavier became a legend in Montana, told and retold with each generation. It was a reminder that sometimes the most romantic gesture was not a grand declaration, but rather quiet, persistent dedication. That showing up and doing the work, day after day, stone by stone, was its own kind of poetry. That building something real required both courage and patience, both strength and vulnerability. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Nathan and Catherine Xavier were together still, watching over the legacy they had built, satisfied that their love had created something that would endure long after they were gone. The rocks had been cleared. The land had been tamed. The family had flourished. And it had all started with a young cowboy who believed he had to prove himself worthy before he could claim the love he desired, and a young woman who had the wisdom to see his worth, even when he could not see it himself. That was the real story. Not just about land or farming or the Wild West, but about two people who found each other across the hard Montana earth and decided to build something together. Something that would last, something that would matter, something that would echo through generations as a testament to what was possible when love and work came together in perfect partnership. The end.